Joining us to dissect this further is mining analyst David Van Wyk. A very good evening to you, David. Good to have you with us on Africa in Business.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me.
So we see China then calling for greater cooperation amongst the BRIC countries when it comes to strategic minerals. So what would a BRICS cooperation on strategic minerals look like in practice?
Well, I think that we have to look at it in terms of global geopolitics, the competition between China and the United States in terms of unipolar or multipolar world. China is in favor of a multipolar world. The United States wants a unipolar world. The Chinese model is about expanding business and relationships around economies and especially minerals. But the United States is more about military intervention in regimes that do not want to collaborate with it in terms of the economic and business model that the Trump regime is proposing. And so we're a little bit between a rock and a hard place. Of the two powers, I think South Africa and the SADC countries are better placed with regard to China in the sense that China comes into Africa with development, road networks, harbors, airports, buildings, infrastructure, and so on, even electricity supply infrastructure, and so on, as they did in Zambia recently as well. So the Chinese are more business and development oriented, whereas the United States still operates very much under an old imperial model of wanting to smash and grab. This is difficult because our economies were locked into the Western economic bloc for the entire colonial period and most of the post-colonial period as well. And to de-link is quite a difficult thing to do without any negative response from the West and especially from the United States. And we see that the United States is quite capable of intervening militarily if it thinks that we are depriving it of access to our resources and mineral and raw materials.
So I wonder if this increase in demand for critical minerals will strengthen Africa's structural bargaining power, or will it just intensify extraction? What is your view on this?
Well, I think that we need greater unity in Africa, and what is happening in South Africa at the moment does not actually contribute to greater unity, unfortunately. We need SADC to unite, especially because within SADC, from the Congo, from the DRC down to South Africa, we actually have a near monopoly on most strategic minerals that are there, except for rare earths where China has a monopoly. And so if we do have greater unity and collaboration and industrial development as well as infrastructure development between SADC countries, roads, railways, connectivity, mobility, and that sort of thing, we are in a very good position to benefit from the global shift in the economy from west to east, because China is rapidly becoming the dominant economy in the world. And if we exclude ourselves from that, we are going to get left behind. It is better to take advantage of it. However, that being said, the Chinese mining industry doesn't have a very good record in Africa in terms of labor relations, environmental impact assessment, social and labor plans, and all the other requirements that we need for responsible mining. Besides that, we need to create conditionalities where we say, we don't want to export the mineral, and I see Zimbabwe has started doing it. Botswana has also started doing it. If you want to invest in our mining, you need to come and create manufacturing capacity here to add benefit to the minerals that we are producing, and not just think that you can come here and ship out the minerals wholesale in big trucks to the harbors and off to China or India or other BRICS partners. So if we are to be in BRICS, we are a small partner in BRICS compared to India and China, Russia, and Brazil. However, we have all the strategic minerals, and therefore we can call the shots to some extent because we want to see economic and social development and growth in our countries and in our region. And so not only do we need unity in terms of the political situation in Southern Africa, but also in terms of the business and economic situation. Also, South African companies must make sure that they don't behave badly when they are mining in other African countries such as Zambia, DRC, Mozambique, and elsewhere. We really need to create a strong chain of brotherhood between these African countries in a fraternal relationship between these African countries in SADC, so that we can actually benefit from the expanded demand for strategic minerals in the world.
And how likely is Africa to capture value beyond the extraction in BRICS-led supply chains?
Well, I think that it depends on our governments, because we need to make the kind of agreements that are development oriented. So in other words, when I see that, for example, in Zimbabwe now, they are creating massive steel capacity and the production of steel in that country, exactly on the basis of them retaining their iron and platinum group minerals that are necessary for the production of steel. So they set conditionalities before the iron and platinum group metals could be exported. And that is what we should also be doing in South Africa. At the moment, we're in a very bad situation because we are exporting almost 90% of manganese, and manganese is incredibly important in this new alternative energy world, but also in a world in which there's greater conflict and people are fighting over resources and minerals and so on. So we have to assert our sovereignty as a nation in relation to the big countries that want to import our minerals and so on. And we have to really begin to say that we cannot just export minerals. We need to step up to a manufacturing base, because our country demands it. The levels of unemployment in our country is a direct function of the cheap labor economy that was there under apartheid and that continues to be here in mining and so on. And that is exactly because we don't have a market for manufactured goods, because we don't pay people enough money to consume manufactured goods on a large scale. We've got all the minerals and metals that are required for manufacturing in this country, but at the moment all the manufacturing is done outside and we are just simply shipping the minerals out.
So this BRICS greater cooperation within the mineral space, could it drastically shift global supply chains for critical resources?
Well, I think it could shift it, but at the same time, we don't want to replace the Western extractive model, which exploited us for the entire colonial period and the apartheid period, with another system which simply just takes our minerals again and leaves us with just abandoned mines, abandoned towns, and abandoned laborers and massive unemployment. We have to integrate our planning in terms of our engagement with BRICS very carefully to ensure that we engage in a manner that treats us as an equal partner and not just as a supplier of raw materials.
So what opportunities does this actually create for African mining economies?
Well, I think that we have opportunities for manufacturing. We assemble cars at the moment, but we don't manufacture cars. And because of Trump's tariff policy, many of the car companies, assembly companies, are closing down. Volkswagen, for example, has announced that it will close down, and some of the others as well. Mercedes is under a lot of pressure and so on as well, to relocate to the United States, because Trump wants to create jobs in the United States with his tariff policy. And so he pushed very heavy tariffs on South African manufacturing to make it very difficult for South Africa to export any manufactured goods to the United States. China is already a major manufacturer. In fact, it's the factory of the world. And that is who we have to compete to, those to compete with those two powers. And in Africa, we've got a very young population compared to other continents. In another 50 years, this very young population will be, at working age, and we need to ensure that this young population actually have jobs to go into. So we have to shift manufacturing away from China and the United States by making agreements with them that says you can have our minerals, but we want your factories. The factories must come here. If they're not here, we're not going to sell you the minerals. And that's really what we need to look at. But at the same time, the hard place that we are in is the United States, on the other hand, with its massive military, constantly threatens military intervention wherever it doesn't get its way. So if we say to the United States no, we might be faced with a gun against our head. And that's the unfortunate situation that we are in. So we really need to, as a subcontinent, the Southern and Central African subcontinent that makes up SADC, we really need to work very hard to make this thing more viable than what it is at the moment.
It's also very strategic for China. If you look at the developments now, I mean, not too long ago at the G7 summit, there was a call by the G7 countries to reduce reliance on, quote unquote, outside suppliers like China, for example. So China's call now sounds very much in line with trying to, circumvent that, or trying to restore its own relevance and create another, power source for itself. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that is a very good point that you are making. But if we look at the demographic statistics for BRICS compared to the West at the moment, population-wise, BRICS is far bigger than the West is as a market. So BRICS in itself, if we can get the trade relations within BRICS itself right, then we can ensure that we will have markets for what we produce within the BRICS setup. And we can do that, for example, by saying to the other BRICS partners, okay, let's manufacture aeroplanes. We will do the fuselage in South Africa. The wings will be done in Brazil. The engines will be done in China, and so on. So we spread the manufacturing across the BRICS countries for whatever products we are producing, whether it's cars, whether it's aeroplanes, whether it's other manufactured goods, so that each country has an opportunity to beneficiate its minerals, but also to participate in creating a new kind of manufacturing environment in which countries collaborate with each other, which they did in the West, in the EU in any case. When they manufacture aeroplanes in Europe nowadays, parts are manufactured in Germany, others in France, others in Britain, and so on. That's the kind of model that we should be aiming at with regard to BRICS, to ensure that some of us don't just remain mining countries, but that we also become manufacturing partners in this process.
It will be very interesting to see how this unfolds, David, and the possibilities that it can indeed bring about. We thank you so much for your insight on this development. That's mining analyst David Van Wyk.